Hello and welcome to a new podcast here on Actual Spirit. Today we're going to be talking about power and the intellect. We have Daniel Fraga, the author of Ontological Design, Owen, the founder of Technosocial Institute, and Raven Connolly, an evolutionary biologist, and I'd say a tantric theorist too. So, recently I've been researching by talking to academics the place of academia today and thinking about my own relationship to academia, credentials, what it means to be an intellectual today, what it means to have intellectual authority. And to cut a long story short, it's very clear that academia has massively declined in standards, that its quality has massively waned. Now, of course, there's political reasons for it. There's paradigmatic reasons for it, with cultivation of intellectual scenes online and more. So I would like to first ask everyone the broad question of what is the place of theory today with the decline of academia? And take this question in whatever way you want. So let's start by Daniel Fraga.
Rule of theory, yeah? I've always found that knowledge production, I'm going to channel my inner Foucault here. Knowledge production has always been very connected to power and the institutions of power, but that doesn't only apply. This critique that I'm making doesn't only apply when you're from the left to the right, but it could also apply from the right to the left and from the center outwards and from outwards inwards. What I mean by this is that knowledge production and thinking is, I think, always necessarily political in the philosophical sense. As such, the role of academia in society is also political. And I think that today it's time, or like one of the blessings of the internet is that it kind of decentralized the knowledge production monopoly from academic institutions and the little clique-esque rat race monopoly walled garden that it produced within it. And that's a good thing. It also signals a civilizational change, because if knowledge production is always connected to power, you could also say that power sustains itself as long as it has a monopoly on knowledge production. That's how you can keep telling everybody to think in a certain specific way as a civilizational mode, right? When you no longer have control over what your people think, then they're no longer your people. And if that was a good thing when Foucault was annoyed at the police and that the hospitals were making that critique, then that must only be said to be also a good thing now that the internet has come around and the proliferation of theories has come about. Probably careerist academics may be feeling a little bit uneasy since they've invested so much of their ego in this journey. But, they are the unintended consequences or casualties of technological progress. And I think if you're aligned with the truth of theory and of the spirit, then you will understand that there's a transition happening between the locations of production of knowledge to the internet, and that's a good thing. And that's kind of what we're doing here in a very sort of DIY, full of heart kind of way. So it's not a bad thing that academia is dying, as long as there is so much alternative knowledge production on the internet. But this also signals political balkanization. But I won't drive this point further anymore. But that's my view.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that because I just came from an event and there was a talk by an academic theologian. And besides the fact that I wasn't really so impressed by what she brought forward, which is irrelevant, she at a certain point said that she doesn't want theory. She's not interested in theories coming from the ivory tower of academia. Now she herself is in academia, so naturally I ask her the question, can you give me examples of this people who are doing this? And then she couldn't give me examples. And now there's an interesting theory that we can already see in Plato, but also very much present in Hegel and Lacan. And basically the way it works is the following. So the way that the Greeks separated themselves from barbarians is to see themselves as Greek, whereas barbarians are basically all the others. So Persians, let's say Scandinavians, Africans, Sub-Saharan and such. And so that means that a barbarian doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't really denote any specific type of ethnicity or race or nationality. It just denotes a collection of all kinds of races and ethnicity. So it's a nonsensical term. Now Stalinism has made some similar kind of move. They had the word subkulak, which was a kulak, which was obviously their scapegoat, but a subkulak was a kulak just in the form of the mind. So he didn't really have any property as such. He just thought like a kulak, and therefore he was a kulak. So this is again like this nonsensical container that's just meant to assert one's own identity because you have a scapegoat. And I thought what this academic told me was a perfect example of that. You scapegoat first the ones who are supposedly in the ivory tower. The moment I ask, can you give me an example? You don't know it. To me, it's very clear that it's just an inversion of her talking about herself, which was clear from the content on which she spoke. Now, Owen and then Raven, could you give me an answer to the question of the relationship between power and knowledge relating to academia and our current paradigm shift?
Me first.
Yeah, let's go with you first.
Yeah. Okay, what comes to mind for me here is a conversation that I watched recently on the recommendation of Hegel last on the Theory Underground channel, because the David McKerricker, I think the guy from Theory Underground, is doing a tour around the United States, and they were in New York with a guy called Samuel Lonkar, and he was giving a talk about orthodoxy versus philosophy. And his thesis, which I quite enjoyed, was that orthodoxy, not meant as just Orthodox Christianity, but orthodoxy itself comes from the two Greek words, but it means correct belief. And orthodoxy emerges in the context of the late Roman Empire as whatever that old imperium was doing, basically to establish an ideological control structure of everybody within it through Christianity. And so what orthodoxy becomes is this general system of ideas, beliefs, practices, I guess, that is the correct belief. That is just simply how things are. And Lonkar places in distinction to this the philosophical schools that started to grow in Greece with Pythagoras, then with Socrates, with Plato, and which carried over into the Roman Empire and indeed into medieval times in various places, but were often at odds with the Orthodox establishment, you could say. And I don't know too much of the late classical and medieval history of this, but certainly it seems there's this kind of tension between the central orthodoxy and you could say, the theory underground. And of course, this is the point, right, where people are coming together to think and to test ideas and to question without the established presuppositions of religion, but actually just with a commitment to dialogue and exploration. And Lonkar's point is, as well, is that some of these schools were in the ancient world the only places where you could go and find men and women meeting on an equal basis, slaves and free men meeting on an equal basis. There was in several of them a sense that everybody was there as a subject, rather than it being, say, within the official power structures of the Roman Empire or then the Christian Empire, of there being aristocrats and plebs, of there being slaves and there being freedmen. and so on and so forth. And setting up these two categories, I think it's then, and his point is that we can think the modern moment in exactly the same way that there is, and perhaps always is throughout history, a tension between the pull towards orthodoxy and the pull towards philosophy, we might say. And maybe it's interesting to go with both those Greek words, orthodoxy meaning correct belief and philosophy meaning the love of wisdom, say, and to consider what those two mean in a dialogue or dialectic between them. And certainly it seems today that there's a battle over orthodoxy. It seems like, I think it seems we could say that a lot of what's going on with the woke left is an attempt to establish a kind of cultural orthodoxy that establishes precisely the types of power relations and conversations that can be said and that can't be said, and the types of oppressions that can be spoken about and the types of oppressions that can't be spoken about or that are simply invisible. I mean, one of the interesting ones that I've just been thinking about recently, because it's a context that it's close to me, right, is that we hear a lot about how Black subjects have been oppressed in the West, but we don't necessarily think about, say, like, we don't consider Eastern Europeans in the context of having been under communism for most of the 20th century and what that's done for East European subjectivity and how that then shows up in various cultures, and then how actually white Eastern Europeans are still being taught the logic of them being European oppressors of Black subjects. So I just point that out as like, it's a kind of, it's not pushed away so much as it's just an invisible conversation that doesn't happen within the orthodoxy of current left woke thinking. And then on the right, with the kind of new conservative right, there's also a battle for orthodoxy. I mean, very literally, actually, with several people going towards Orthodox Christianity precisely because it offers a total framework for how sexual relationships should look, how political relationships should look, how social relationships should look. And there's an appeal to that. And several of us, we've not only seen it in theory, we've seen it playing out in practice, right? And of course, the advantage of this is it's by the book. And I think, and this will be my last point, I think one of the good things that Samuel Lonkar joins out in his analysis is that the advantage of orthodox thinking is that you know who the enemy are. You know who the source of the problems are. It's not us, basically. We're all right. We've got everything sorted. The issue is, to go back to what you were saying, Dimitri, the barbarians outside of the gates, this general undifferentiated mass of people who don't know, they haven't received revelation, essentially. And either they need to be converted to revelation through soft or hard means, or kept outside.
Right. I would like to add another one. I think the distinction between orthodoxy and philosophy is really great. I would add one more category to this, which would be sophism. So sophism, of course, all the Greeks talk about it, is basically one who is not really interested in seeking wisdom, but to hunt after opinions so that he can use those opinions to persuade others. But it's totally removed from any pursuit of truth, and therefore is inherently cynical. Now, I think any true philosopher also has a side of being worried about the fact that he does not turn into a sophist himself. And I think a great example of what would be a sophist today are all those pop philosophy, pop science, pop videos on YouTube or TikTok, which claim that if you just listen to this video for 10 minutes, you'll have figured it all out. That's a perfect example of sophism. Now, another type of sophism would be that academic person which I just talked about, which herself would be the best example of what she deems she does not want to be, which is someone who is in the abstractness of an ivory tower. And Lacan had a theory called the Four Discourses, and specifically the university discourse, he said, is unified by a master signifier, which would be maybe let's say the production of knowledge itself, but this is intrinsically disavowed. So you can ask basically an academic, like, okay, you're producing knowledge, but for what? What's the true aim? Well, the true aim is really not to uncover that true aim, since it's the production of knowledge itself as a vicious circle that is the goal itself, which also comes with a lot of problems, even though it can have some value to it. Now, Raven, I would like to ask you the question on the relationship between power and knowledge and what have you.
Yeah, definitely. I'm interested in going back to what Fraga mentioned about knowledge production and power, and the monopoly that academic institutions have had on this until, quite recently. I think the paradigm shift that we're moving through is that a new form of power has emerged in the digital age, which isn't so much about knowledge production, but is about information centralization. If you can centralize the kind of traces of activity that are, deeply plugged into the kind of unconscious activity of all the users that are interacting in this cybernetic system, this form of power is even more immense than the knowledge production of academic institutions. Of course, I would also want to expand our understanding of what an academic institution is. Theory and the humanities is just one department within the context of these institutions. And in terms of doing research into the production of artificial intelligence or artificial life, the application of technology and the development of tools, I think academic institutions are still the centers of this kind of power. Of course, we also have, R&D that's going on within corporations. So this is happening outside of academia and has different incentives with it as well. And those are new competitive factors with, who's doing more fundamental research and design into technology. The thing about theory to me is theory is something that, while it's convenient to go to school and to have the insulation of, let's say, free tuition, or you have a loan from the government and you're among people who are dedicating themselves to deep study, theory is about being in relationship to the paradigm, to the reality as such that we find ourselves within. And more so, this is about understanding the implications of living in a technologically accelerating society, and how that is forcing us to confront the collective unconscious and all of the kind of mutations that are possible of human behavior in the reality that we are continuously careening towards and, might argue, accelerating. I think theory at this moment in time is actually done better with people who are acting more like anthropologists of the world, who are sampling impressions from all of the different kind of subcultures and behaviors and all the pockets and all the layers of this world that we're living in today. There's such an enormous amount of subjectivity that is all coming together in the medium of the internet. But not only that, the way that subjectivities can interact with each other, I think the example of the Theory Underground book tour is incredible. That there is the feedback loop of being able to centralize a group of people who are interested in a particular form of analysis, who are looking into how to be in reality using a certain set of frames, which doesn't give you necessarily the same conclusions, but you're using similar tools for trying to grasp this extremely novel environment that we're in. So you can centralize these people, and that is a form of power. Absolutely is a form of power to centralize these minds and these entities into a connectivity on the internet. But then turning that around and going and traveling around the United States, for example, which is a country that is completely in psychosis, a place where you can really see on the streets what are the impacts of living in a highly capitalistic, consumeristic society that doesn't have a ground in any form of real history, and is in that way you can see it in people when you interact with them. Oh, this person's living in this reality bubble. You know, like this person is over here in this crazy world, or like this is the relationship between drugs and madness and poverty and living in a city. And I think that that is a necessary part of doing good theory today. And there's so, like I said, there's so many subjectivities, and everyone is holding a piece of the puzzle of the impact of a technologically accelerating world. And if you're in your little academic bubble with your insulation, I think that it's a disservice to actually grasping the reality that we're facing. And people meeting together in spaces, I think also like the European American connection and even to India and to other countries, like that's another really important thing that's happening, because we're living in a global singularity, right? We're connecting the subjectivities of all of these different parts of the world. And that really is a huge expansion of our kind of consciousness, or a sense of the center. You know, they're no longer barbarians. Like these are all people. We're all dealing with this reality together. So where's academia in all of this? I mean, academia, or I mean, if we wanted to broaden it to like institutions that have centralized infrastructure for the production of technologies that end up being disruptive when found application at scale, like that, I think is still going to be a kind of institutional problem for the most part. I think AI and other forms of software like that, we can talk more about that if we want to, because maybe there's something there where it's decentralized and anyone can do it. But in terms of theory, yeah, it's like get on the ground and fucking see what's happening. I think that's really where the genius is in this time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you really put it well, that it's we should see it as an anthropological study. So the ways a lot of I'm kind of scapegoating them now, but it doesn't matter. Academics like think, and their whole aesthetic, like having a suit and being busy with the paper on this nice clean campus, like that whole lifestyle aesthetic really misses something. And like I'm just gonna be very straight up, like oftentimes it's way more philosophically interesting to me to talk with someone with a remarkable life, or like a very extreme life, compared to someone who's gone through all the hoops correctly and has now entered into some kind of comfortable position, or is in the process of getting a master's in philosophy or some other academic humanities discipline.
Yeah, totally. I also want to double click on the point I made in the beginning, which is like moving from like a new form of power just being knowledge centralization, like information centralization, and that being like now you can create a platform and you can centralize a bunch of activity, and suddenly you are in a position of leverage. And then that attracts money, it attracts attention. So because of this like attentionalist paradigm, and it basically being able to kind of create a city, a city environment where you have these superlinear dynamics of power, right? It's like the knowledge production is much slower, like it's much more difficult, much more expensive. So we're kind of moving into a paradigm of information centralization, which I think also creates problems, which is like, okay, well then where is the deep study happening? Because information itself it's not enough for deep thought. It's just giving you access to the impressions of all of these subjectivities in one place. And obviously, if you're an instrumentalist capitalist, you're going to use this for the profit motive. But if you're a person who's actually interested in understanding what is our moment in history right now, what does this say about our paradigm and what is happening to our collective consciousness as subjects, that's a totally different it's a totally different relationship with all of these centralized impressions. And I think that's the task of someone working with theory today, is to really confront what we're seeing, the imprint of the collective unconscious of billions of people.
Yeah, and this gets to Daniel Fraga's project of ontological design, since he's greatly critical there of Aristotle and Kant, who have the idea that knowledge is like an instrument you pick up to deal with objects of knowledge, and they can't conceptualize the feedback loop occurring there.
I have written on my notes here something as I was hearing you guys. So the orthodoxy, the ownership of the right to impose the right means to think on others, is an occult gesture, not so much insofar as it forces everybody to come to the same forums online, for example, as you know, and to the popular places as opposed to the ones that nobody knows about, but precisely as it forces people to come online as the medium for theory itself, right? So the medium is the message. So the fact that theory power takes place through all of these same tools, through the English language. The reason why we're not barbarians is because we use English and we understand graphical user interfaces. We understand how to tell computers what to do when you click this button and that button, and we understand that these words take place in the same way. That is, to me, another, in addition to the levels of centralization that you guys mentioned, another level of centralization that is perhaps more pervasive, more occult, happens under the surface, which is precisely, it's not only about saying where the debate happens, it's also not only about saying what are the terms in which the debate happens, traditional Foucauldian knowledge power, but also telling people, enforcing people to have the debate on particular means, on particular tools. The fact that we have debates on the internet via Zoom is already the message. That medium is already a message of theory that is rather hidden. And there's many hidden assumptions that it, bolsters, and that ontologically design the collective unconscious, that design the ways by which the collective unconscious expresses itself. How the fuck can, people from such varied countries as ourselves come to express themselves in the same forum? Well, precisely because we've been funneled through it. And I think that the implications of this forcing through, it's a very McLuhan-esque point, but we need to understand, my point is that we must understand the centralization of this orthodoxy of means, not only of message, is important. And that, to me, the orthodoxy of means is where theory power taps the clearest into desire. What do I mean by this? Like, it is this orthodoxy of the means of the debate that, in my view, truly ontologically designs and organizes the people's desires, the people's fears, and the people's hungers. It's not only the terms of debate. Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. But I'm also interested in this, like, occult dimension of the means of the debate. And I think truly that is the occult, that's the angeliopolitical aspect of it. If God is not only real, but reality itself, then the means by which debates take place are angels, bubbles. Bubbles, not only the same words that people use, sort of a keyword analysis of this part of the internet versus that part of the internet, but just the fact that people use words on the internet in this way. Like, that's the paradigm that I'm sort of, that comes to me, maybe this is the wrong word, but a dialogical mode, or a mode of dialogue. And then finally, like, my mission, or my vested interest in this is that in order to obviously fulfill my own masculine imperative, I'm interested in knowing how to do research in this dialogical mode, in this, what's the term for this? Not even a discourse, in this fucking technological paradigm, via a la McLuhan, right? Maybe that's the way to speak about it. Because to investigate anthropologically in this new paradigm and to do data-driven research on it, for me, requires it's not only about the words, but the way desires flow through the means, and then the words obviously will come, but the words are just a small part of this mode of desiring that is more and more centralized. More and more we desire through the images, the disembodied surface level images of the internet. Oh, and you had this brilliant book about the occult and witchcraft where somebody spoke about these images with no depth that just like got like posters around you that frame your reality. I'm interested in the fact that we're all getting channeled to this. Like, who's not on the internet in 2023? Who's not somehow looking at pixels on the screen, graphical user interfaces? Who's not?
I would like to respond to this.
Please do.
So we've probably all heard that meme of like, oh, if it wasn't tweeted or if it wasn't posted, it didn't happen. Pixar, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
I think Hegel would fully agree with this, since for him, he writes about in the philosophy of history about the Peloponnesian War that Thucydides wrote about, I believe. And for him, he has an analogous comment talking about the Peloponnesian War that if it wasn't for Thucydides, it wouldn't have meant anything, right? So I don't remember the exact thing, but I'm just getting at the paradoxical, contradictory, and really kind of delirious state that we are in now, where there's also a perverted mechanism happening here with in regards to the algorithm. So first, to give a little example of this, first something happens in reality, then you decide to tweet about it. Then you are on Twitter so long that basically you want to tweet and then go start looking for what is there in reality worthy of being tweeted. Now, this is just an example of the internet as a layer being over-determinative of the reality and being only seen through what is the value for it there, instead of reality having its own significance and then the internet just being a top layer upon that which can be removed. It cannot be removed. There is no such thing as reality without internet, insofar as you're a subject who's on the internet.
Beautiful. And if I may just quickly jump in, then the way that circle closes is hyperstition, is the tweet that in turn makes reality, that forces reality to a specific way. Could we not say the same about the use of language? The fact that because we use language, we are forced to experience reality in this particular way, through its affordances, or through the means of the computer, or through the means of particular theory, or things like that. So it comes full circle in a way, is my point.
I jump in here. So Daniel, the book that you were referring to, it's Peter Gray and Alkistis Dimech, The Brazen Vessel, which is a collection of essays on the modern occult. I mean, I think it's one of the best fucking books out there at the moment. Raven and I stumbled on it in a bookshop in Glastonbury earlier this year. It's very good. And the point of the argument that Peter Gray makes in that essay, it's like you said, the internet creates a world of surfaces and creates the illusion that everything is there. It's like, because you can ask Google search, ask Wikipedia, now ask ChatGPT everything, there's a sense that every question can be solved by these interfaces. But from an occult perspective, I mean, occult literally means the hidden, right? Occultism is always interested in what isn't being shown, what isn't being said. It's the art of secrets. I mean, the old maxim of Eliphas Levi, right? To know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. And Peter Gray's point is that to have essentially a revolutionary political practice in the 21st century, one needs to carve out spaces either in communities or inside of oneself that are invisible, that are secret, where the shadows still play, that aren't just all put out there, say onto Twitter, into the interfaces, into the algorithms. And it's interesting that although he's quite Jungian, he does I think, separate this analysis from the more mainstream dynamics of shadow work, where you hear people saying, you've got to integrate your shadow, know your shadow, integrate your shadow. Gray is saying that there are always several shadows, and shadows are context dependent. And occultism, a la this way, is much more an art of dancing with shadows, without this kind of neurotic obsession with integrating them and holding them all together, but rather being attuned in every space, in every relationship, in every mode of subjectification, I suppose. What are the blind spots? What are the invisibilities? What are, you could say in Hegelian terms, the negativities? And I find that interesting, right, to go to what you said, Dimitri, about maybe Hegel would would agree with the idea about everything only happens if it's on Twitter, right? The Thucydides example. And it made me think, I wonder if this is Hegel, the social conservative, who's kind of wanting everything to be inscribed within a relatively knowable and predictable social order. You can tell me whether I'm going up the wrong tree or not in this, because but I think what's interesting and what is consciously being put forwards in, say, the work of Gray and the occultists, especially occultism practiced not as just a kind of Sunday activities for bored yoga bourgeois middle class people, but actually people who are interested in a Fraga-esque way of developing power, is a kind of willful step into a type of psychosis. I mean, like Cadell was just lecturing the other day on, like, Lacanian terms, psychosis, what is the foreclosure of the symbolic, basically not entering into the signifying chain with other subjects. And I think that might actually be exactly what occult practice is. It's carving out a little space where one intentionally goes psychotic, where one refuses to be subjectified by the signifying chains and by the relationships and by the practices, whatever Foucault would say the apparatuses are of the current moment. But does this precisely with a revolutionary intent, because one does not want to simply be a subject of the present. One refuses the conditions of the present, and so willfully goes a little bit mad with the practices that are established and that exist.
Yeah, I want to respond to that. That's all really great. For one thing, we know that we have around 1/3 of Aristotle's writings, and we don't have his dialogues, which are presumed to be really great. But insofar as we don't know that, we just know Aristotle as from the writings that he does have. So in that literal sense, everything else doesn't matter. Like, you can ruminate about it, you can be fascinated by the fact of, oh, there was so much knowledge then and we lost it all. But this preoccupation with loss for Hegel is already some kind of fantasy and illusory, because there's nothing really there except for what you yourself put there, which is nothing itself, since that's what the subject ultimately is. And plus it's veiling. So
but even there for Hegel, right, is as much the presence of the absence that
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I just make like 30 seconds?
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Wasn't it Isabel Millar, and I was so sad to not be able to join her session, that said that one of the obscene aspects of contemporary culture, which will then in turn feed into AI and the psychoanalysis of AI, is this idea of reality owing us obscene and total and complete revelation of its secrets if we inquire it through the means of science, right? Don't know? Research. Don't know? Do science and figure it out. Don't know? Google. Ask ChatGPT, right? It's the same thread. And it's almost like demanding that reality shows itself in all of it's obscene. Show me everything. Pixar didn't happen, is what ultimately we ask the reality. But it feels to me, and very quickly, that seeking to illuminate all of the shadows and the occult things in the world is kind of a foolish Luciferian gambit. Luciferian in the sense that it challenges God as the apophatic hiddenness. You know,
I think the terms are inverted there. I mean, I don't think that's a Luciferian gambit, but
that's me trying to be Zizekian about it, try to flip it. Like, so Lucifer is like, fuck you, God. I know everything you know, and I can figure it out, and I'll do it on my own. But perhaps the trick here, or my provocation, is that might it be that Lucifer then is unaware that relating to God requires hiddenness, precisely something that is hidden, submission to an unknown, not only as, madness, but sort of being okay with not knowing, starting with that absence as presence is my...
Yeah. I just want to respond to that because I think this is really, in a way, what Hegel's project is about. It's about the fact that we are always living through some kind of disparity in the present. One way you can conceptualize this is the disparity between your self-image and the actual real of your desire, which you don't, which you basically disavow. So let's say you have some kind of academic route and you want to have a self-image of you being like some great professor, and then at the end of the day you become like serving lattes at Starbucks with your PhD. Like that's a point at which you should, at which the disparity should hurt so much that you basically reconcile with it, release it, the self-image, and then go beyond it. And it's only by going through that pain, that agony, that despair, reconciling with it, accepting it, and releasing the self-image, that you can really create a new reality beyond that, a new life form, a point at which you can say, hey, maybe I wasn't that, and maybe I'm not supposed to be at all. And then from there on out, you move on. So in that sense, to me, if you take the centrality of Hegel wanting to apprehend the disparity in the present, that's where his like revolutionary nature lies, not in any communistic way, even though you can see why Marx was inspired by such a corpus of thought.
So one sentence, Hegel wanting to apprehend not only the content of the disparity in the present, but disparity as such.
Yeah, I think that's
Well, I said that to go to what I said is I think actually, in my understanding, the image of Lucifer precisely does stand for this non-totality of the present and this necessity of falling out of heaven. It is a kind of image representing the dialectical process. That's how I understand it anyway, which is why I made that point. But the actual, the technical, the operational thing we're talking about, I think there's an agreement here.
So yeah, the picture of the fall, right? Sorry, go ahead, Raven.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I think what I think of in the moment today is we are really confronting the uncertainty of the future. And in that sense, it's not just the disparity of the present in terms of what we have lost from the past, but it's also this immense uncertainty about where we're going and what could possibly happen that is occulted in the future that we are conceiving. And what I'm thinking about is the fact that with the AI paradigm that we're moving into, one of the biggest fears in AI risk is these occulted actors who can have an asymmetrical impact on the entire planet by taking some sort of action that is unscripted, that isn't written, that can't be seen before it happens. But because of the power that's being unleashed by artificial intelligence and how it's hooked up to other forms of technology, it in of itself is its own problem, like LLMs, that like there's a distortion there. But I think that that's also a bit of a distraction from what the real risks are with this tech. And when you go and you hear people talking about the existential risks, like there is so much shushing, there is so much happening behind closed doors. And that more and more of the real activity of life is going to happen behind these doors because of the information ecosystem that we're in. Because if you put up a little flag and then everyone else puts up the flag, it actually seeds these ideas in the collective. And right now, there's this issue of information containment, of idea containment, because what about these occulted actors, who could potentially do something that would end human life or end the experiment for everyone? And because of the porosity of the world that we're living in, we have massive vulnerabilities. Like we are experiencing, like if you're someone who's interested in security and being safe, this is like the worst era, like for your consciousness, because our bodies are vulnerable, our histories are vulnerable, our continuity, our very capacity to even imagine a stable future is vulnerable to the hidden in a way that's never been so asymmetrical. So I think that it's this illusion of the surfaces being able to give you a totality of knowledge is a huge, like, it's like looking at the blinding light and being like, this is everything, and this is upside down. Like, I really think that this is one of the biggest things that you have to tear your eye away from and not be fooled by. You have to go into the occult, or else you are really like, you're just as vulnerable. I mean, intellectually speaking, like, we all are as vulnerable as everyone is, you know, to these asymmetrical things. Like, I don't know how much we can actually do to save ourselves from this. But in terms of having a mind, a subjectivities that is actually trying to confront the possibilities, you have to get away from the blinding light of surfaces. And that's where grounding into the reality, the real, there's no replacement for it. Like, you can't, there's no simulation for that. You just have to go and confront it.
My intellectual piety, or I've recently began thinking of the intellect as a form of piety itself, or a form of some kind of godly task. And part of it has to do with the right attitude that you can have towards knowledge. Because you can have an attitude whereby you can uncover under every stone and shine the light under every stone and discover there the true reasons for things, and then, you know, print them. We're so completely designed by this terminology. Print them into the flat surfaces. Or you can have this fantastic attitude that you're referring to, Raven, this occult attitude of trying to. I'm reading this book by Pope Benedict XVI called Jesus of Nazareth, from a Girardian point of view and whatever, and it's fantastic. I'm loving this book. And in some point he says that he makes like a little parenthesis, and where he says, and aren't we all controlled by forces we are unaware of? The Pope said that. So to me, that means something special. It means the acceptance of the fact that this is the world of passing images and bright lights and worldly power, but that's the occult attitude that you were referring to, Raven, of, say, tracing and trying to read a little bit of the intentions of these asymmetrical powers, mystically even, dream reading, data-driven anthropology. They're not that different, dream reading and data-driven anthropology. But what they both speak to is the motivations behind these forces that dominate us, despite the fact that we are not aware of them, these princes and principalities that even in the Bible they speak of. And my God, nobody can produce an occult reading of tarot or an occult reading of the seashells or make some kind of divination, can do so if they do not submit to the fact that there's an unknown with which they're relating to. Same with any decent thinker and researcher, I feel. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm definitely fascinated with the fact that a lot of the discourse that happens today is tainted with unknown motivations. These motivations, you know, I put them in the same category of the angels. You know, the fact that you don't know you want something, but your whole being screams to everybody else that you are the type of person that wants that something. You know, you can tell the motivations of certain people by looking at them, right, face to face. But you know, their unconscious yearnings are angelic, and we can read them. To read them, we must submit to the fact that there's an unknowingness that is structural to reality, whence all of these things come from. And rather than systematize that, the best we can do is interpret them in a heuristic way. The dream interpreters are older than any enlightenment type, you know, impetus. And that is my contribution to the discussion of AI. What are your motivations and your incentives? That's perhaps very surface level, right? If you complain about ethics, then maybe that's all you can do. Or maybe that's, you're twisting people's arms into, you know, say that your argument is, I believe that AI is too white. Well, probably that's your power strategy. You have certain incentives that make you do that, and that works for you. There's other people who perhaps have other incentives and make them have other activities. That's perhaps the surface level of the motivation mapping that I'm alluding to with this ramble. And my argument is that if you trace those motivations down, there will come a point at which you can't really trace them anymore, because you begin to touch into the unconscious. And there you go into the uncanny, unmappable machinations of spirit. So what to do for me is to be at peace with this unknowing, and to have faith in this relationship with these unknown forces. And by reaching the point of saying faith, I'm saying the faith of not only God as real, but God as reality, is what I want to say. And that turns out, I think that's some kind of shift that I've come to recently, or that I'm intellectually toying with, which is, yes, we can do a lot of research. Probably no, we cannot map everything and know everything and make the best plan of the world. You know, you cannot map all the conditions and all the incentives. But you can certainly, you know, do your little job, and then at the end of the day, accept that there will be a part of the job that cannot be done, but accept that in some kind of relationship to God. And if you do that, it's certainly a different task than to have to carry the whole lamb, all the sins of the world, all of your sins in your shoulders. Because then what you do is you put your sins in the shoulders of the Savior, or in the shoulders of the transcendental figure. There's a desiring flip that happens there that I think is the key, in my personal opinion, to navigate the messy, warlike, asymmetrical incentive structure. The high school clique with knives in their teeth, that is the competitive world of AI and the market and whatever. In other words, you can only serve one of two masters.
I have a comment that here. So why is Plato still being read today? Well, if you read a Platonic dialogue, sometimes it seems to be clear that Plato is using Socrates as a mouthpiece for, let's say, his theory of forms or other such things in the Republic. Now, in other dialogues, Socrates has like 3 lines in the beginning, and the rest of the dialogues is like a stranger talking to someone else in the Sophist, for example. So, but in many other dialogues, it's also not clear what Plato exactly is getting at in a first reading. And this is why it's an age-old question of what is Plato communicating, and who is Plato addressing it to? And this second question of who is Plato addressing it to is what Leo Strauss had a kind of special answer to that, because he said that actually all of Plato's dialogues were his esoteric a message of social engineering. And if you read in Plato's letters, it's very explicit. Plato says in letter 7 that he will never write a treatise and he will never write down his teachings. That's what Plato himself says in his letter, which we don't know if it was meant to be, maybe it was meant for this letter to go public, maybe not. We don't know that. But yeah, it's possible that everything that we have from Plato, his dialogues, just had a function of social engineering, and that his actual teachings which were known to be, especially in his later day, to be very abstract and things like this, were something else. And Plato was also very clear about only initiating those who are trained into the tradition of thought or some kind of mystical tradition. So what are we really doing when we're like writing a text and publicizing it? Of course, a lot of people initially just want to show off that they're writing something and that they have knowledge about something. But it's more interesting to look at it in this way, that in writing something, it's maybe not mainly about the content of what's there, but who it is addressed to and what this form entails in this manner.
Yes. Didn't Lacan say that style is the man one addresses? To whom do you address your utterances? And the structure of incentives of your utterances, which master do they serve? This is a huge question, because you can serve a master that you know, and that you know exactly how he's going to pay you back, or you can serve the master of unknowing and have some kind of submissive relationship with that. That's what I'm interested in.
And besides this, what you said about being, as I would say, being reconciled with the state of unknowing is truly what philosophy is about. And this is also what to me gets to the power of philosophy, or like true self-thinking thought that can see transparency by means of invisible apprehension. And it also gets to the paradoxical nature of something like theory or anthropological studies or these kinds of disciplines, because it's all completely invisible. But there is an altered apprehension by going through the transferential process of educating oneself in this. So the very process of mediation itself, like, why do we really read like Lacan or Hegel? Like, I think that the true benefit from reading someone like this is the process itself, not what you get from it at the end.
Well, it's like it's that thing about, maybe to use Lacan's register, reading writers, for example, who write in the discourse of the master versus writers who write in the discourse of the university. And this goes to what Daniel was saying about style and who is being addressed. And in fact, the entire conversation about the academic institutions, and indeed about orthodoxy versus philosophy. Because orthodoxy presupposes a certain relationship between speaker and audience. Like the orthodoxy, the university discourse is kind of saying, look, this is what is established. I'm speaking on behalf of what knows and agrees. I'm speaking on behalf of the big other to you who need to know about the big other. Where to read a master is to read someone who is not so much standing on behalf of another big other, but temporarily standing as a big other themselves. But I guess the paradox of it is, like, when they're a real master, they're so radically singular that it's impossible to just turn this figure into a big other. And to do so creates dramatic errors. Like when, I mean, like, to take the writings of it, like Marx comes to mind, when people absolutize Marx and turns Marx, like everything Marx has ever said is true. And rather than using Marx as teaching you to think in a certain way about history and about class, to attempt to say everything is Marx, blah, 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 blah. And they say you can do that with any great writer, great thinker, but the way to be with them, I think, is to allow the paradoxes of the masters to wash through, and to kind of experience this is a subject who is, maybe the phrase is, grappling with their own being and their own paradoxes.
I think this is completely true. also I would add literature to this process of
Yeah.
symbolic mediation, and also the fact that people are wrong philosophically, like in a sense you could ask the question, does it really matter? Especially insofar as those are the people who a lot of times do have the power, like take politicians, for example, or people with loads of money, or who own companies. Like they're not like philosophically there's not an obviously the ones who are at the top, the elite, do not have the best kind of knowledge that there is, or the best way of thinking that there is. There's a contingency there. So, but their ideas, even though they might be illusory or very much phantasmatical, they still have a concrete effect in the world.
Error is still ontologically productive.
Who?
Error, mistakes.
Error.
Yeah.
Mm.
Can I make a short point, guys? Here's a little musing about wayfinding. These four discourses of that Lacan suggests might be our approaches to knowledge. These four discourses are almost like four different possible ways that you can orient yourself within any given subject, problematic, topic, moment in life, whatever, right? They're almost like the coordinates of navigating the afterlife. I just saw a documentary in ancient Egypt the other day, and it's all about giving the soul after death these coordinates with which to relate to a given problematic, in this case, death, which is the biggest. But even in the occult, we have clues about this north, south, east, and west in the form of the four suits of the tarot, the four discourses, the four sort of cardinal points. So my suggestion, my final point here is, might these not be a heuristics to navigate any possible discourse, any given discourse? You know, you can read Marx as a discourse of the master, of the hysteric, of this and of that. And so not that these are set in stone, but rather ways of positioning yourself towards it, orienting your gaze within the middle of this circle. I guess the freedom that this gives you is it allows you to speak everybody's language, because some people will look at Marx as northwest quadrant, other people as the northeast quadrant, other people in the other quadrant, other people in the other quadrant. This will betray a certain orientation. This will betray a certain style of their own sort of desiring, right? But the problematic is the same. You just have kind of different ways to approach it. But those different ways aren't endless and aren't Deleuzian rhizomatic. There's probably four quadrants, broadly speaking, that Lacan kind of put together in those discourses, or the occult puts together in its mandates. I don't know if this is smashing too many things together, but I felt like sharing this, guys.
Yeah, I guess and things, I have a few things that have come to mind over this last ping pong we've been going through. One of them is this idea of like concealing the pregnancy. This is the thought that came to mind. There's all of these non-linear dynamics, right? Like sometimes there's some obscure writer hundreds of years ago who gets rediscovered. And in the moment of their surfacing, there is a piece of technology, there's a piece of the world that actually resonates with the material that was excavated at this point in time in history, right? So in this sense, there was a long concealed pregnancy. There was this long period where the knowledge was occulted. The potency of some sort of creative act was still dormant and still incubating itself throughout these waves of history and you know, the goings on of politics and just getting the human medium to continue. And on the subject of pregnancy, that's the other thing that I want to bring into the conversation is with all this discussion of the production of text and this capacity, this will to intelligence and the storing of information outside of the human medium, what is still ultimately the task is the creation of the human medium as it continues to face the uncertainty of the future. This still remains as a lineage. And I think today the body, of course, is white. Like the body itself is revealing its necessity as the core medium in which we are all in reference to. And the sharp relief between the dissociated world of surfaces and the embodied experience of the human medium. And then also what we're seeing is I want to use the word externalities, right? Like if you merge with this virtual surface, then in order to actually see the effect on the human medium onto the bodies, you have to leave the surface. You have to see and be and in relation to the other bodies that are in relation to these surfaces. And on top of that, I mean, I just throw this little point in here that like we are now facing an existential problem of the reproduction of the human medium as such. A massive contraction. Like that's the thing we forget about when we're looking back at history. It's like, oh, someone wrote down the story of the Peloponnesian War. But what about like the successes of the Persians, of maintaining a small minority of people throughout many generations without losing their unique culture and language? That oral tradition, that passing down of the impression of existence from one being to the next into the future. Like this is something now today is actually being thrown into the center for examination in the kind of Heideggerian way of like this chain is being broken and therefore we are confronted by its fundamental necessity for the existence of like human subjectivity as such, right? So shouldn't get lost in like, right, like the you know, Pixar didn't happen. It's like, oh, well, you had to be there. That's the other side of it. You know, you had to be there. You can't understand because you had to be there. You know, like these are the two sides, right? And like you had to be there is the that's the immensity. And that's the thing that Pixar didn't happen doesn't want to deal with.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff in that. You know, that what that reminded me of was something I was thinking about the other day. With regards to this question of population replacement and declining birth rates, because I was reading someone writing about Foucault and Foucault's analysis of discourses and power, and essentially the way in which an entire field of discourse kind of clues something. And this goes back to several things we've been talking about, right? So one of his textbook examples being the proliferation of scientific discourses about sexuality within the Victorian times. People look back and go, oh, the Victorian times are sexually repressed. And it's like, no, they were talking about sex laws. They were just talking about it in a particular idiom, in a particular language. And then I was thinking about that today, in which there is such a proliferation of discourse and theory and ideas and arguments on the left and on the right about family structure, about sex, about what is a man, about what is a woman, about what are the appropriate relations between the genders. But what is being spoken about very, very little is this question of population reproduction, of actually having children. And it's actually, Raven, you drew this to my attention with your conversations with Malcolm and Simone Collins, who I think you had on this channel, Dimitri, right? And I think, or you, maybe I've gotten that wrong. But and Elon Musk has mentioned about it as well. And it's funny, right, to go back to what you were saying, Raven, about these occulted conversations happening in circles of people who know. And it seems like this is a conversation that's happening, but it's not getting out into the mainstream at all. It's very, very hidden because it's existentially terrifying.
I just want to respond to this. And Antigone here is a great historical document, because in Antigone, she is basically stuck between the substance of familial law and the state law. Now she embodies the very contradiction between both as an impossibility, because she has to bury her brother, as a duty from familial law, which is illegal, yada yada. Now, for Hegel, this piece of art actually shows the incommensurable contradiction of Greek society that brought it to destruction. Now, eventually we get the Roman Empire, and then we see the emergence of Christianity, and especially what we will later call civil society emerges in Christianity, which is a kind of mediator between familial law and state law. Now, of course, the word politics comes from like the rule of the city, and the word economics comes from the rule of the household. So we can still see the etymology of this split between family law and state law. However, politics was never meant to deal with, let's say, the economics of the household. Now, political economy is again something different as such, but I think perhaps this is like the traumatic core of politics, which is so hard to talk about. And as you said, Owen, like both the left and the right don't talk about this very real issue, which is the declining birth rates and the status of the body and the family in any given society. Now, perhaps you could make the argument that it is therefore not that the state should mandate policies which overcomes the problems of birth rates, and as the Collins will emphasize, is actually not effective. States that have tried to implement policies to go against it. So maybe there's something on the front of like what we call civil society that has to emerge there, or like they propose a revival of religion in a certain kind of form.
Maybe these conversations that are happening, but that we don't know about, maybe it's not so much that we don't know about these particular ones, but precisely because this is a conversation about unknowingness, or rather about the relationship to unknowingness, or in other words, a relationship to God. So, although this conversation is brutally absent from mainstream discourse explicitly, its fingerprints are everywhere that you look. Its fingerprints are actually quite obscene, and the shape of society is in its shape. In the shape of the absence of this conversation about the real stuff. Maybe that's the consequence of these flat surfaces. Maybe each of these flat surfaces is a tiny little fingerprint of the absence of this central real conversation. Now, names that we could utilize to define, for now, heuristically, this central conversation could be sort of a demographic disaster, but it could also be the absence of explicit God in certain cultures, or rather in all the cultures that do not replace. Cultures that have God, they replace. Cultures that do not have God do not replace. Maybe that's a fingerprint. Maybe there's a certain style of their relationship to the unknowing that allows for that godly imperative to manifest itself. Because the unknown doesn't get to speak if you do not give it space. And that space is pretty absent. And societies that are so blinded by lights and the explicit demand of reality, of God, to manifest itself in our own terms and to serve us. I guess to the point where maybe that doesn't work. I don't know if this is in any way coherent.
There's a very, great example of these beetles that they're attracted to their mates because they're shiny. And the males now, like with glass bottles in their environment, they'll like go and try and mate with these glass bottles because they're shiny, And males have this problem in particular, like where they're like, oh, this is like the illusion of the thing that I'm supposed to throw sperm at. And so now I'm like caught in this loop where I'm staring at the bright light, and I keep wanting to satisfy myself by this expenditure in relation to the bright light, but this in no way is improving my fitness whatsoever. when you have like everyone's, huge, massive part of the population all staring at the bright light, and like doing this kind of feedback loop with this relationship, I mean, it's a self-terminating loop. And it is an exploitation of a little pocket of our minds, the way that we're programmed to receive signals from the world, and differentiating between, a complete whole that has fertility, but not in the symbols of fertility, but actually represents the capacity and holds the capacity for continuation within itself, the mystery of this potential future continuation. And aiming for that negativity, aiming for that, like the absence of the thing, but that pregnant absence is, I think, that is one of the tasks of the masculine, of the phallus. And the phallus is not aimed in the right direction right now. And yeah, I mean, of course, I'm also sympathetic to this idea that religion is a central part of how we can navigate moving into the future. It is an immense task, to think about navigating ourselves into some sort of cohesive community that's oriented towards some sort of religious truth and some movement towards a God. But we have to think on that level.
Sorry to jump in there. Might we not extrapolate the principle of the shiny bottle to bigger motions of the spirit through history, historic movements, intellectual movements, the enlightenment that pornographically demands, if we bring it to psychoanalytical terms, of reality, which is God, because God is real, to manifest itself, to bear itself open, to show its truth explicitly. Satan asked to Jesus, if you aren't you God, then I'll make you king if you just submit to me and show your face, right? It's technically, I would argue, Luciferian or satanic. And if we extrapolate that idea about the shiny beetle to society, maybe that's a parallel that we could draw to characterize what's happening now as the failure of aim. Aim your dick in the right place, Mr. Beetle. And somehow in that equation, the problem maybe is the light, because the light makes the things shiny, or this pornographic obscene demand for light to illuminate everything is a little bit the failure, because it makes the bottle seem very shiny and seem like a real beetle, whereas in fact it's just an illusion. And maybe it's all about the hiddenness, make love with your eyes closed, at least in the beginning. I don't know, just learn other things, refuse the orgasm, I don't know. There's or maybe sorry, I know the answer to this. It's just piety and faith. Faith is precisely making love with your eyes closed. And we're sort of doing something.
To me, one of the greatest challenges of today is how to be a human subjectivity that can face the exposure of the most grotesque and perverted, the most differentiated, freakish, mutational weirdness of the collective human experience that's being imprinted and totally pornographically exposed, and still have faith in the human soul. Like this, to me, these are the poles. Like, can I witness this? Can I hold this? This is the tantric practice of going to the charnel grounds and finding the divine in the burnt material of human bodies and waste. And to me, I feel like this is a challenge. Like, people, the like hard men make that one. I'm like, these are fucking hard times. These are hard times. These are not easy times. Anybody who sells you on that idea is a sophist. Like, this is a hard time for the spirit and for the human soul. Even if we can have a convenient meal, delivered to our door, it's like, can I hold all of this and still find a reason to create a human medium, to continue the human medium, to continue the presence of human subjectivity, when I know how perverse and grotesque and disturbing and potentially destructive and uncontrollable, you know, and immense and uncertain all of this is. That takes, I think, genuine faith. And that's why we're in a religious era. It's really takes incredible depth of faith to make it through, because you also get damaged by this overexposure. It's not like there isn't some sort of impact on the subject. If you're completely dissociated, you know, you can just be like, oh, you know, this is someone, you know, being raped in a porn video, whatever. But like, that's not really touching the thing. You're not really contacting what's happening there. That's painting over it. That's like that's continuing the illusion. It's creating your own illusion on top of the illusion. But the confrontation with this and the depth of it, and still finding the faith, is, I think, the real task. And I'm like, okay, let's fucking go. I don't know why this is what's happening, but we're going through a big filter.
Yes, and this is Plato said that it's refutation, that is the process of purification consists of nothing but refutation. And this is really what you spoke to as well about anthropological study, you know, and allow yourself to be refuted over and over and over and over and over and over again. And this is the process of purification. Again, I would like to quote Plato, since we've been speaking about the bright light. Just to finish off the story, Leo Strauss believed that Plato's entire corpus was a noble lie that Plato did in favor of whatever he wanted to achieve with it. Now, I think it was the Phaedo, Plato said that through Socrates, that he cannot really speak on the form of the good itself, because it's like staring into the sun. It's too it's too blinding. So he has to talk about beauty and the ideal forms in a way that is already kind of distancing from this ultimate bright light, or like the ultimate mystical vision. And it's really a strange condition of the human subject to be in, that Lacan speaks to, where every way you conceptualize your own trauma is already a way that you're putting forth an illusion that evades the true trauma. And whenever you thought you found the true trauma, it's probably some kind of point of impossibility that hides the true point of impossibility yet again. And this like constitutive decentrament from yourself, and this displacement from yourself, to me means that we're like constitutively disembodied too. You know, we live in a day and age where everyone loves to talk about, let's be embodied, let's be animals, like Deleuze basically says these kinds of things. But like this, I think this telos is simply all wrong. It's more so accepting to a certain kind of extent that we're always disembodied. And this is what the nature of jouissance is. It means that indulging and regulating against the indulging are both going to become excessive forms of enjoyment. So of course, go into them both. That's the point of the point of it. That's how I read it for real. Like in regards to anthropological study, going, seeing the sameness of the high and the low, which is truly what philosophy is about. You know, like Hegel says it in the Phenomenology of Spirit. The penis is an expression of the speculative nature of the concept, because it unifies the high and the low. It's the organ of procreation and of urination. And this is why Zizek talks about toilets and all those types of things. You know, there's a real reason to it. And if you're going to be this intellectual who's like too clean to actually go through this process of purification, then that's not it. That's not where it's at.
I think I need to go in a second.
Yeah, do you have any closing words, Owen?
Yeah, only the thought, I've shared it with you guys before, that I've just started to think all of those beautiful water statues you see in city centers and gardens are just aesthetic dramatizations of the urinary urge. That's
Nature.
I'm out. Thank you for listening, guys. Ciao.
Bye.
But it seems like that's the prodigal son story. Yes, it is good to go into the law, lose yourself. That's the whole point of it. Will that lead us into a filter? Yes. Who will be filtered? Those who perhaps do not go enough into themselves. Might we have this, Cinderella-esque ending to our story today yet again in the era of technology? Do you still believe in fairy tales? No, the point is truly this, is the getting lost with some faith. Let yourself fall in love, maybe I tell myself now, is part of that faith, is part of that relationship with the unknown on which the world is based. And those who forfeit that on account of being fascinated with bright lights, maybe they're the ones who are filtered. But at the end of the day, man, it is the love as unknowability itself that persists, whereas worldly things come and go, come and go, come and go. Right? So history is a large enterprise, and many empires have also been at this stage, or many people, maybe not so many as today, right? This is a special time, but things die, things perhaps are supposed to die. Dying is the concept. I mean, we're used to this. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, there's historical precedent. We're not completely derooted, right? We'll die. People die. People come up with things for power. They come up with really amazing things today, but maybe the pattern is the same, and maybe the relationship with the unknowing is the key that kind of wraps the circle.
I want to respond to this by making a few points, and then Raven, you will have some closing words too. Christianity is the religion of love. And Jesus said that he didn't come to bring peace, he came to bring a sword. And Christianity is, by being the religion of love, is also a religion of radical engagement and decision-making in the world. And thus losing oneself in that very world and making those distinctions. There is a Marxist theory of religion that thinks that religion is some kind of superstructure on the society itself. And I think it's totally wrong. I think religion, especially if we talk about Christianity as the religion of love with the sword, is always in some kind of state of rebellion against the present state of things. And in that sense, it's way closer to what Marx claimed about his own ideology to be a radical critique of the present that moves from its own immanence. Now, we can take the ideas of Girard in different ways. The two most popular ways that I see Girardians use it is, on the one hand, which Girard has said himself, to take a contemplative distance from the process of mimesis and to not play along its game. Now, this would be a kind of pseudo-Buddhist, pseudo-Neoplatonist, kind of an Oriental way to look at it. Whereas, on the other hand, the true Christian stance in regards to mimesis is to think and act within mimesis. And
yes,
that is just the final words I want to have.
Oh, I want to open up like so many other.
Yeah, I understand.
We just like, oh man. Okay, fuck. Wrapping up or like leaving cliffhangers. I guess I'm gonna leave a cliffhanger. I've really been thinking since Isabel Millar's lecture about this the replication of the undead, that we're now living with this kind of immortality problem, but it's a strange form of entity that is potentially going to populate the earth in a post human reality. And how this is kind of forcing us to confront mortality from a new perspective. I loved this idea of being allowed to die. Being allowed to die. And we'll leave it there. Leave it there.
You didn't need to channel the Red Queen herself, Raven. Jesus.
All right. It seems like it's time, guys. Bye bye. Thanks for watching.
All right.
Bye.
Please subscribe.